we had this lady that reached out. She had purchased it for her grandmother, the Just Blue. Her grandmother had mild cognitive impairment, and they gave her the Methylene Blue. And she started telling stories about her childhood in Mexico that nobody in the family had ever heard before. And this is maybe 6 months into releasing the products. And I was a little skeptical about Methylene Blue in the beginning because, again, this is new. Nobody had done this before. Dr. Ted, who I work with, is like, he has this fantastic way of feeling out what's going to be working before anybody else does. And I was skeptical. And then this first story, I was like, holy crap, what do we have here? And then I got another story, maybe the week later, of this lady that had mold for 3 years. The mold in her body was gone. The mold in her house was gone. She still felt terrible. She's a physical therapist, out of work for 2 years, starting taking Methylene Blue. 2 weeks later, she's back to work.
All right. Well, it's a real pleasure to have Dr. Scott Sherr on the show today. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Zora. It's good to be here.
It's going to be a fun episode because my mouth is all blue and we're going to talk about methylene blue.
And she's oxygenating just fine. I promise. Everything's going to be okay.
I know. I didn't realize how blue my mouth is. So if you're on YouTube, like this is the moment to go watch the episode on YouTube. But it's very appropriate because I took some methylene blue. This whole episode is about methylene blue. My audience here have seen me use methylene blue before. We're going to talk about when that happened. But there are people who have no idea what is methylene blue. They maybe have heard of it. So why don't we explain what is methylene blue, and can you share how and why you became such an expert in it?
I appreciate being on the show and talking about a very interesting and very novel and quite blue compound that is methylene blue. So it's shockingly blue. And Zora, if she opened up her mouth, you would see how blue her mouth is. Currently, that's intensely blue. And so the reason why methylene blue was actually developed was actually as a textile dye back in the 1870s, a long time ago. 1870, ladies and gentlemen, not 1970s, 1870s, so a long time ago. And they were creating these dyes to dye various things, various colors. And this one particularly was used to dye blue jeans blue, amongst other things blue as well. So if you're wearing Levi Strauss in the 1870s and 80s, they would dye blue with methylene blue. But what's interesting about this is that at that time, there was very few antimicrobials available. There was no such thing as a prescription antimicrobial. Antibiotics didn't come around until the 1950s. So testing all these various compounds for antimicrobial properties, and they figured out that methylene blue was a fantastic antimicrobial, and it actually killed a very challenging type of infection, malaria. And so in 1897, it was the first drug registered with our early FDA in the United States back in 1897. And
it was the first drug. Sorry, isn't it the first drug that was ever?
Yeah, the first drug, the first one, yeah.
Crazy.
And so it was the first one. It was called the magic bullet at the time, actually, because you could give very large doses of methylene blue and it would kill pathogens. It would kill microbes, but it would not harm the human cell, the human host. And so between 1897 and 1950, it was the primary antimicrobial round that you would use. Used it for urinary tract infections, for fungal infections, viral infections. If you were a soldier in World War II, you were given it prophylactically if you were fighting in the Pacific Theater. So if you're fighting in Japan and the islands around Japan. And they had songs about going blue in the loo, actually, the loo being the bathroom here. If those of you don't know, that's the UK way of saying loo is bathroom. And because methylene blue concentrates in the urine, and so it would make the urine blue. And so that's why they had all these songs about it. Even General MacArthur himself would sing this, like he was the head of the whole war, basically. And so into the 1950s, then antibiotics came around. So you had your penicillins that were derived from various fungus and things like that many people probably remember or maybe learned about a long time ago. And so that's when methylene blue started getting its sort of additional chapters. It became very prominently used in fish tank cleaner. It still is now, because if you go to the fish tank store and you want to clean your fish, you actually can get fish tank cleaner that has methylene blue in it. Now, interestingly enough, it's not cleaning the actual water. It's actually cleaning the fish itself because it's an antiseptic. It actually kills fungal infections in fish. Now, please don't anybody go drink fish tank cleaner. In the early parts of the pandemic, there was a great headline that said biohackers drinking fish tank cleaner to reverse their age. Well done, clickbait. But again, don't drink fish tank cleaner. It is vastly contaminated with heavy metals. And we'll talk about methylene blue and contamination later, but you don't want lead, cadmium, mercury, and arsenic in your methylene blue. So please don't go that route. But even pharmaceutical grade methylene blue can be iffy if you're not careful. But we'll leave that aside for now. Going back to the story, methylene blue is actually after being really prominently an antimicrobial, it was actually the first antipsychotics were derived from methylene blue because it has what's called monoamine oxidase properties. Thumbs up, everybody, I guess. That's the Zoom thing. And monoamine oxidase properties means that it prevents the breakdown of norepinephrine, dopamine, and serotonin. So those neurotransmitters were increased when you're taking methylene blue. That's dose dependent, by the way. So low doses, just a little bit, and higher doses more. But the first antipsychotics were actually derived from methylene blue. And then the next chapter of methylene blue is kind of the chapter we're in now, which is we have a significant amounts of interest and knowledge of how mitochondria are affected by methylene blue. Low doses of methylene blue, especially, are fantastically supportive for mitochondrial function. And we can go into that story in much more detail. The short story there is that methylene blue is what's called a redox cycler, which means that it can enhance energy production in the mitochondria and also enhance detoxification at the same time. So it's like clean burning energy. Instead of your gasoline powered car, which your cells are, by the way, when you have energy produced in your mitochondria, you make ATP, which is your energy currency, but you also make water, carbon dioxide, and something called reactive oxygen species. These are important, but if we have too many of them, or if we don't have enough antioxidant capacity to neutralize them, the system starts breaking down, getting more inflamed and more rust in the system over time. Just like if you had metal rusting over time, it's the same kind of deal. And what methylene blue can do, which is interesting, not only does it help with energy production, it helps the detoxification side. So you're not making more stress on the system when you're using lower doses of methylene blue. So there's nuances with the dosing. There's nuances on how the methylene blue can work on mitochondrial function, depending on what's dysfunctional. But in essence, Zora, that's really where we got very interested in it, which is looking at studies where methylene blue was working on mitochondrial function, enhancing energy, enhancing detoxification. So there was studies that were being done in Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, traumatic brain injury, stroke. There's also a study on normal people with no medical issues, seeing significant cognitive improvements using methylene blue and doing some MRI imaging and things like that. And so in 2018 or so, a colleague of mine named Dr. Ted Chicoso, who's the founding pioneer of Troscriptions, our company, along with prior to Troscriptions being developed, we developed a company, a nonprofit called Health Optimization Medicine and Practice, which is a nonprofit organization training practitioners on how to optimize health rather than focus on disease. It's separate than functional medicine. It's more focused on the root causes of health rather than the root causes of illness, although I have a lot of functional practitioners that are friends of mine. But the nonprofit developed Troscriptions as a way to help people right now while they're on that longer path of optimizing health. And Dr. Ted at the time was very interested in methylene blue. And so we created actually the first commercial product available for methylene blue back in 2020. So we were the pioneers of the world of commercial methylene blue. Right now, there's about 60 or 70 companies making it. In 2024, there was maybe 6 to 10. And then in 2025, things went kind of bonkers this year where we're recording this because of RFK and Joe Rogan and some other prominent people talking about methylene blue in various ways. And so we were the pioneers of this. And the first product we came out with back in 2020 was a methylene blue caffeine, nicotine, and CBD combination called Blue Cannatine. And so that was that's like our focus, productivity, get things done for 3 to 5 hours, drop in a flow product. And we're using methylene blue in that product specifically because it's support of mitochondrial function.
Wow. So methylene blue does a lot. We talked about the antimicrobial, antibacterial, antipsychotic. So then that can make people feel, I guess, happier or more calm, or because you have different formulas as well.
It regulates depending on the situation, because the big thing about mental health disorders is that there's a significant mitochondrial component to it as well. So I've had some people take methylene blue at low doses and they feel more calm actually, or their anxiety gets better. Or it could be that their depression improves as well, depending on the situation. But yes, short story is that there's a mood elevation. Not all of our products at Troscriptions have methylene blue in them. That's important as well. We have a suite of them. We have 3 really that have methylene blue in them, one for focus, one pure one for energy, and then we have a higher strength one for more significant mitochondrial support and anti-infective capacity. Because the dosing of methylene blue matters. The lower dose is really supportive for mitochondrial function. Around 4 to 25 milligrams or so is kind of the sweet spot, where infection, antimicrobial, acute stress can be anywhere between 1 milligram to 2 milligrams per kilogram, which would be around 50 milligrams to about 150 milligrams of methylene blue, depending on the situation.
Okay, so it does a lot, basically.
Yes.
What I kind of wanted to say
Yeah.
it was used for
Yeah.
malaria before, which is incredible,
Mhm.
and helps with mitochondrial function, and it helps even with the detox. And it just sounds like a miracle thing. And actually, I met a nurse who said she still uses it in the hospital. Like it's not some
Yep.
biohacker thing. It's actually still used in medicine today. And I think it was because if there was intoxication, car smoke, what was it? Some
Monoxide. Yeah.
carbon
Yeah.
monoxide poisoning, they would kind of fall on that if something else didn't work.
There's two main uses. Actually, there's more than this, but two main uses of methylene blue in medical practice, both in the emergency room. One is in a situation called something called methemoglobinemia, which is something that can happen with carbon monoxide poisoning, and also can happen with accidental poisonings from other things like sodium nitrite specifically. And what happens there is that you cannot carry oxygen on red blood cells because of the conformation of iron. Iron is a big portion of your hemoglobin molecule, which binds the oxygen. And so what methylene blue can do is actually can change the redox state. It can change the conformation of iron, the electron state, basically, to help it actually carry oxygen easier. So it's an antidote for that. And it's also used for something that I hope nobody ever has to get, which is cyanide poisoned. So if you get poisoned with cyanide, cyanide actually blocks and destroys one of the complexes in the mitochondria called your electron transport chain. It's complex 4, cytochrome oxidase, for those who like the nerdy stuff. And what's cool about that is that methylene blue, if given very immediately, can actually do some really sort of ninja work moves in the electron transport chain to change how things work and make things flow so you can still make energy regardless of the blockage. It's super cool. Sometimes in lectures, I'll show how you like cyanide blocks this, and then methylene blue comes in, it like binds here, it goes there and does this and does all these cool things that are really cool from electron flow and proton pumps and all those cool things. It's also used in medical marking. And so if you're getting like a sentinel node biopsy, sometimes in breast cancer, it's also used in marking for colon cancers as well. So that when the surgeon goes in, if there's a big colon cancer that they can't remove on an endoscopy or colonoscopy in this case, then the surgeon goes in, sees it's all blue in that area and just takes it out. So it's been used in the medical world for a long time. And even up until like in the 1960s or 70s, if you lived in a Soviet bloc country, it was used for viral infections as lollipops. So I actually have colleagues of mine that remember when they were kids that they would get these methylene blue lollipops that their parents would give them if they had a throat infection, if their throat hurt, and they would go away in a couple days. And that's because of the antiviral capacity of methylene blue, and has actually been studied in combination with higher amounts of red light exposure, specifically as an antiviral, and up leveling the capacity of it to be an antiviral. With the red light story, which is interesting, lower doses of methylene blue, like 4 to 25 milligrams or so, combined with red light, like 680 nanometers around that level, have a fantastic supportive and synergistic effect on that complex 4 in the mitochondria. So synergistically improving energy. So you take your methylene blue, 45 minutes or an hour later, you go out in the sunlight, or if you have a red light panel, which I have back there, I think, then in my closet, then you can get the combination synergy that way as well.
Incredible. So, okay, I have a flex beam. It's kind of a red light
Yeah.
device that you put on a body part, for
Mhm.
example. So, if I wanted to use that combination of methylene blue with my red light therapy, because I don't have the panel,
Yeah.
how would you, can you give us a scenario what it would look like?
Totally. Yeah. So the lower doses of methylene blue, again, in combination with the red light, wherever you have it on your body, it's going to synergize with that. So the mitochondria in the area that you're shining the light is going to get more powered up, and the methylene blue is going to go up there and help as well. So you're going to get this synergistic effect. We do have people that are using red light in more targeted areas for injuries or for various reasons, blood flow in the belly, whatever it might be, and then seeing a significant synergistic benefit using the methylene blue to enhance energy production in that area. And if you're looking at from an anti-infective component, methylene blue is what's called a photosensitizing agent. And so that's why it's actually been studied in some really interesting studies in breast cancer, for example, where you can actually use methylene blue, you ingest it, you typically high doses of oral or even IV, and then you shine light in an area like a laser, or like a red light laser, like a powerful laser, to actually kill off cancer cells. And there's actually clinics outside the United States that are actually doing intratumoral lasers along with IV methylene blue or high doses of oral methylene blue, and seeing some fantastic benefits. I can't obviously recommend any of that because it's very much not studied in a clinical way that would be like something that I could absolutely recommend. But there are things that are happening around the world combining this methylene blue at these higher doses along with more powerful lasers. But for the most part, most people are using it lower doses of methylene blue and then the red light therapy with the panels or with something on the body as a way to synergize and make more energy. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just want to give people a visual. Imagine you have gut issues and you take your methylene blue because Troscriptions is a troche, or you can swallow it, or people have drops or however they want to take it. So I can imagine it's like kind of going
Don't use
down
the
into
drops,
the, huh?
please. Don't use the drops, please. We'll talk about
Okay,
it.
we'll talk about drops. Okay, later. But I can imagine the methylene blue going into your stomach because you have gut, and then you maybe lay your flex beam or your panel or whatever on your belly. Now I'm thinking in my situation, I've had two total hip replacements. So I've got these gnarly scars on my legs. So part of my protocol for the scarring was GHKCU, which is very blue. And now I'm thinking, wait a second, I did take methylene blue because of the antimicrobial effects, is what was recommended to me anyways by my regenerative medicine doctor. And she's like, well, there's a whole list of things to do. Methylene blue was on that list. So I took it figuring, okay, I'm going to be in a hospital for 5 days. So I just might as well take this. But I'm wondering for my scars. So I was using my flex beam, this red light panel on my legs for the scars, but could I have somehow rubbed methylene blue or dropped it on the scar, obviously once it's healed and closed, and then put the red light on it? And would I have any more benefits to that?
Yeah, there aren't that many great studies on this, but there have been some anecdotal reports reported to me that topical methylene blue on areas of injury can make it heal faster. And I think it's the same mechanisms that we've been describing before, especially because one of the things that I didn't mention, which probably be important, is that methylene blue can act just like oxygen in your cells, which means that if there's not enough oxygen around, which can happen in a tissue bed that's not getting enough oxygen to those cells to help them heal, that's why we get more scarring, for example, that methylene blue might be able to compensate for that and improve the capacity of those cells to make energy from what we call aerobic respiration, from having the oxygen around there, even if there's not as much oxygen around. And this becomes very important, actually, because what we're seeing in methylene blue usage is that it actually improves endurance in most people that try it. And the reason for that is that you have the capacity to use that aerobic respiration for longer when you have methylene blue around. I have a couple of my patients, this is early on, maybe even 3 or 4 years ago, when I started testing it with them in more intentional, in more significant way. And I had this one lady that I spoke to after a couple of weeks. She's like, yeah, I'm not going to ever stop working out with methylene blue. And I'm like, well, why? She's like, well, when I go on my treadmill, I can keep my heart rate up for another 15 to 20 minutes before I have to stop. So she was able to keep her heart rate up for longer because she was maintaining her aerobic capacity for longer, which is super cool. And there's actually some studies, at least in animals, that it extends the time when you actually reach your lactate threshold. So you can go for longer without feeling like you have to stop because you don't have the burning you get in your muscles from, that like, oh, now I need to stop kind of thing. And then this also applies to people that are traveling. For example, if you're on an airplane, you're pressurized in an airplane to about 8,000 feet above sea level. Now, most people maybe don't realize this, but as soon as they close the cabin door on your airplane, many of us will get very tired. And that's because your oxygen level just dropped which is at sea level about 21% oxygen in the air. The rest is mostly nitrogen. If you live in a city, there's going to be other fun pollutants in there too, of course, but 21% oxygen. And then as soon as you get on an airplane and they close the cabin door, you're about 16 or 17% oxygen. So that's significant hypoxic stress. And your body goes, oh, this isn't cool, and tries to get you to sleep. And then also causes more inflammation, more oxidative stress, all of those things. And so the good news for me is that I live in Colorado. And so 5,500 feet is where I live, 8,000 feet on an airplane. It's no sweat most of the time. And also when I get off a plane, I'm typically at 21% oxygen. And it's like glorious for me. So my aura ring loves me when I go back down to sea level because I live at altitude all the time. And I have more capacity living here for long periods of time because I have more red blood cells in circulation. But what methylene blue can do here is it can compensate for that low oxygen level. You're going to get less hypoxic stress. You're going to get less inflammation. You're going to have more aerobic capacity. So we have jet lag protocols that we've developed over the years that work very well, especially if you pre-treat with methylene blue before you get on an airplane, and then you give yourself another round of methylene blue depending on how long you'd be on the plane and kind of where you're going to compensate for that low oxygen state. And so it could be really helpful as a jet lag hack. And to back to your question, which I know I kind of sideways here a little bit, but on scars, I don't have a lot of experience with this, but what I do think from at least anecdotally is that if it's used in wounds that to help them heal, it could definitely potentially be helpful. But I would be combining it with your red light exposure as well. And one thing that also popped up as you were talking is I have a decent amount of practitioners that'll use higher doses of methylene blue for dysbiosis, for bacterial overgrowth, for SIBO, and things like that. And some of them are combining it with red light therapy. And so higher doses of methylene blue become antimicrobial. And then you use red light on your belly at the same time as like a 1-2 kind of punch for that overgrowth or for parasites or for pathogenic bacteria. And we do see significant benefits there. Typically, the dosing of methylene blue in those cases is going to be at a milligram per kilogram. So around 50 to 70 milligrams, either in one dose or divided doses twice daily. And that's typically under practitioner guidance, but seeing significant benefit there where I think that there's significant potential to be helpful in a lot of people.
Yeah, I asked because I have seen some skincare products use methylene blue in it. And that's why I was thinking, well, maybe there is something there. But
Yeah.
there were a couple of things. You mentioned the jet lag and you having a protocol because one thing methylene blue does is when I first heard about it, all I understood was more energy. People are saying, I feel more energy. It's like a coffee replacement or something. So if you're using it with jet lag, I bet there's a certain protocol because one of my jet lag hacks is when I'm flying to Asia from Europe or the US, and I make sure I have a night flight and I'm going to go to bed and I'm going to sleep as much as I possibly can on that long haul flight. So I can't imagine taking methylene blue because then I'm just all energized and I should be sleeping at midnight, not. So how do you deal?
Right.
What's the jet lag protocol?
So the way to think about jet lag, one of the ways to do it is everybody's probably heard of these time shift apps, right? Where you're trying to change your time the week or so beforehand to try to get on the time zone where you're going to be traveling. That's optimal because if you can do it slowly over a week or so, or even 2 weeks if you're going to Asia, then change your time zone so that by the time you get there, you're almost on their time zone. Like that's optimal. Not everybody can do this. I have a hard time doing this for sure because I have kids and it's very difficult, but that's ideal. But the ideal, let's try that again. The ideal way to try this is that you should be taking your methylene blue as if you are in the time zone that you're going to. So for example, if it's 8 a.m. at the time zone that you're going to be going to, then you take methylene blue as if it were 8 a.m. in the morning, for example. If it's midnight, where you're going to, you're not going to be taking methylene blue. You're going to want to be sleeping, right? And so we have actually other products that are very helpful for that. And then there's other hacks that are really important, of course, that could be very helpful on a flight to help you sleep. Number one is don't fly coach if you can avoid it. No, of course, that's not very easy for most people. But yes, really the key here is to understand what the time is at your time zone that you will be arriving to, not the one that you're departing from, and then use that as your metric. So at 8 a.m. at your time zone, you're going to take this much methylene blue. At 12 p.m., you take this much. At 4 p.m., you take this much. And what it comes down to, interestingly, Zora, is that like lower doses of methylene blue are not very stimulating for most people, especially if you're combining it with other things that might help you fall asleep. And so I found that for travel, what I'll do is take a very small amount of methylene blue at night in my time zone that I'm going to, but then overpower that with something that's going to help with sleep at the same time, because that mitochondrial support while you're sleeping can actually help you sleep better. And that's really interesting because I have some people that will take methylene blue at night because it helps them sleep better, even though it's technically increasing some of those neurotransmitters. But sleep is not just this passive time of our night where we're not doing anything. Our brains are very active, especially in REM sleep. So I have some patients that will take methylene blue right before sleep because it actually improves their REM sleep overnight. And so it's very different for everybody. But the majority of people will take methylene blue in the morning at its higher dosing, and then maybe take another dose, maybe 12 or 1 o'clock in the afternoon. That's the most common. But I find that it's not a stimulant like caffeine or nicotine or something like that. It's not going to have that same effect. It usually has the effect where it gives you this sort of elevation effect if you're taking pure methylene blue, okay? If you're taking it with other things, then it's going to be different. But pure methylene blue just makes you feel like you're rising up kind of thing, like you're elevated, like you may not even feel it entirely. It may be one of those things where you look back at your day and go, oh, wait, I didn't get tired in the middle of the day. I didn't get that sort of irritability that I would have when my kids knocked on my door in the middle of the afternoon. Something's a little bit different. Then you look back, oh, I felt better all day. Like I just had this sort of clean, sustained energy. And that's very common for methylene blue as well. So it often doesn't feel like a stimulant. And for most people, it doesn't feel that way.
How long does it take for it to kick in?
So it depends on how you take it. So if you take it as a troche, so the way we develop it at Troscriptions are these buccal lozenges. It's called a buccal troche. It's a dissolvable lozenge that goes between your upper cheek and gum, and it takes about 15 to 30 minutes to dissolve. The nice thing about a buccal troche is that they're fast acting. They bypass the slow process of digestion, and they're also more bioavailable typically because digestion also deactivates or makes things less active in the body, usually, except for methylene blue, which is interesting, which I'll talk about here in a minute. And the third thing about troches that are really nice is that they're titratable. You can take a quarter, a half, or full. They're scored, so you can kind of cut it up and make it easy. Now, methylene blue is very interesting, though, because it's almost 100% bioavailable, whether you take it as a troche, whether you swallow it. And the only major difference is going to be how fast it works in the body. And so, as a result of that, we discussed very early on in the podcast, methylene blue is very blue. So not everybody's going to want their mouth to be blue. And so if that's the case, they can swallow it. It's going to be slower that way, but the mitochondrial effects are going to be the same. The antimicrobial effects are going to be the same. I have some of my patients that swear by taking it in the mouth because they already have a lot of brain fog, concentration issues. I have one of my colleagues that has Bartonella, for example, and she gets Bartonella-induced brain fog sometimes, and she takes it and she puts it in her mouth. The brain fog goes away in 15 minutes. But if she swallows it, she doesn't get the same sort of effect. And so that's why she likes to use it as a buccal lozenge or as a troche as we have it. So that's the major difference if you're going to swallow it versus use it as a troche, for example. But most ingredients, most things outside of methylene blue are more bioavailable by dissolving in the mouth rather than going through digestion.
Okay, I know we're going to cover drops and we're going to tell me what's wrong with that. But if
Sure.
somebody were to take it as a drop, how long does that take before they feel anything?
So drops, it's going to be similar, right? Because a drop, if you're going to swallow it, is going to go through digestion, the same kind of thing. So typically, it depends on if you're an empty stomach or not. If you have an empty stomach, you can feel anything that you swallow, whether it be a methylene blue troche or drops, within about 45 minutes to an hour for most people. Drops might be slightly longer than that or slightly shorter than that because it's a liquid versus something that needs to be digested a little bit like a troche, but troches dissolve at body temperature, so they're pretty quick. That's what it comes down to. But the key to understand here, Zora, when you're talking about drops versus troches, other like capsules and things like that, is that what methylene blue really has to be we have to really understand about methylene blue is that contamination and potency are really a big deal because it's made in a lab. It's not made from nature. So methylene blue is made, it was the first fully synthetic drug that was made, and that's why it was approved by the FDA back in 1897. So synthetic sounds scary to people, but let me just kind of put it this way, okay? Not everything synthetic is bad for us, just like not everything natural is good for us. I know that most of us, including me, want to stick to things that are natural when we can. But we have to remember that if you take something that's natural, like the wrong mushroom, for example, you could potentially die of liver failure. I've seen this actually a number of times when I was in training, or just get really bad diarrhea if you eat the wrong seeds or whatever, right? And so you have to remember that not everything natural is good for us. The natural things have protective measures to prevent us from eating them. And just like not everything synthetic is bad for us, we unfortunately don't live like in an ancestral world with beautiful lighting, beautiful food, beautiful water, beautiful relationships, all that kind of stuff. Although maybe you can argue about the relationships part when we were Paleolithic ancestors, but certainly not the water, the food, the toxins in our environment, everything else, the lighting, et cetera. And so we live in a synthetic world, and this methylene blue has just this fantastic capacity to compensate for this mitochondrial dysfunction that we're seeing rampantly around. 94% of US adults have some element of mitochondrial dysfunction. 94%. That's only 6% of the US population, adult population, is metabolically healthy. That is crazy. And so methylene blue has this fantastic way of coming in and enhancing, supporting, compensating for mitochondrial dysfunction. Okay. So the synthetic versus natural argument, I don't buy. And that's the reason why. Now, of course, not everything synthetic is good for you, of course, right? It's not like we live in the Jetsons and we want to have meals that were made in microwaves all the time. We know this is not the future. This is not the future we all want. But saying that, when you're making methylene blue, it can often be contaminated with those heavy metals that I was talking about earlier, lead, mercury, cadmium, and arsenic. So you don't want those, right? If you're trying to help improve mitochondrial function, you don't want high levels of those kinds of heavy metals because it's going to make things not work so well, I promise.
But if it's synthetic and made in a lab, where is it getting all the heavy metals from?
It's
Because
coming
usually
from
that's
the
like,
actual equipment. It's coming from the equipment that's being made, that's being used to make the methylene blue.
ah,
Yeah.
okay.
And so you have to be super careful. And so what happens is from so what happens is methylene blue is made. Okay, it's made in the lab, and it's not made if anybody is telling you, any of your companies that are direct to consumer are telling you that your methylene blue is made in the United States, they're lying. Okay, it does not get made in the United States, only being made in other countries. And funny story, I spoke to somebody a couple weeks ago. He's like, "Yeah, I bought this methylene blue that was said it was made in the United States, but it took 3 weeks to get through customs." All right, so you have to be super careful. Okay, and so it's becoming coming from other countries. Almost all of the ingredients that are in any of your supplements, ladies and gentlemen, are coming from other countries. That is okay. Okay. So what happens is these ingredients, whatever company that you're getting your products from, the ingredients in those products are coming from other countries. And what they're supposed to do is come with what's called a certificate of analysis, a C of A. Okay. The C of A is something that's coming from the ingredient manufacturer, but it's an independent assessment of their ingredient, independent in quotes. It's supposed to be. Okay. And then you get that independent assessment, that certificate analysis, you get that ingredient coming into the United States. And then you can either say, as a company, as a supplement company, I trust it. Cool, let's put it into a product. Or you could be like, wait, should we trust this? Maybe we should verify this. And if you're a good, excellent, awesome supplement company, you should be testing that certificate of analysis to make sure it actually says what it's supposed to say and that it's not lying at all. And there's a great, if anybody wants to look it up, look at creatine gummies, for example. A
Yeah.
big scandal recently about how creatine gummies have zero creatine, even though the certificate of analysis from the laboratory manufacturer of the creatine said perfect amount of creatine.
I
So
saw
this
that.
is what,
I
yeah, this
saw
is
that
why
guy
it's,
who like tested five or
yep,
10 different creatine gummies and he found there was nothing in there or very little or certainly not what was on the label. And that's just
exactly.
shocking.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
This happens across the board in the supplement world. And so in the methylene blue world, what we do is we get our raw ingredients from either Japan or Korea typically, and we test it again to make sure that it meets our specifications. Doesn't the heavy metal count is extremely low. Its potency is what it says on the label. If not, we throw it out and we get more. And we've had the same manufacturer for about 4 or 5 years now, and we still have to toss out thousands of dollars worth of product at least every year, every other year, because it doesn't meet our spec. And we've tested a lot of the products on the market, so it was what it comes down to. And none of them meet the potency label claim at all, which means that, especially liquids. And so if a liquid says it has 10 milligrams of methylene blue per ml or per drop or something like that, it's usually about 50 to 70% of what it says on the label. So it's going to be about 5.5 to or 5 milligrams to 7 milligrams and not 10 milligrams, for example. And what I hate about drops the most, Zora, is that people don't know how much they're taking. And so if somebody says to me, "Oh, I'm taking 10 drops a day," I'm like, "Well, how much is that supposed to be?" They're like, "Oh, I have no idea." I'm like, "Well, then you have no idea how much you're taking." "Oh, I'm taking 10 drops a day and I feel great." I don't know how much that is. I'm taking 10 drops a day and I feel terrible. I have no idea how much that is. So the troches, you know exactly how much you get every single time because we test them after we make them to make sure that it's exactly how much it's supposed to be in the troche as we say on the label. And so that's just not something that's done not only in the methylene blue world, but even in the supplement world entirely, because there's no regulations here. Nobody has to do anything. And so you really have to make sure you trust your supplement companies that they're doing these extra steps and going the extra mile to do this stuff. And so liquids are the biggest culprit by far. And then even tablets and capsules that we checked with methylene blue did not meet their potency claims. And the purity, we didn't find any methylene blue out there that was like massively impure with like huge amounts of heavy metals, but definitely a couple that were a little dicey, especially on the cadmium, mercury, and lead side. So you have to be super careful. And I guess the biggest thing here is don't buy your supplements at all on Amazon if you can avoid it, because Amazon is notoriously known to have tons of counterfeit stuff on there as well. So always buy directly from the manufacturer if you can, and ones that you trust.
what about the powders? There's some powders where you can make your own drops.
Mhm.
And that would, have you tested those or do you know anything about those powders?
The powders are the same deal. The powders are unfortunately self testing. Again, there's one particular company out there that refuses to send out their certificates of analysis, for example, to anybody else. We've tried. And so the deal here is that if it's coming from a lab, I don't care where it is, right? If it's coming from the United States, which is not possible, or if it's coming from another country, if they say, yes, this is 100%, then it should be tested by another independent lab to make sure. And ask them if they've done that. Ask them if the company has done that. There's a couple of companies that give you direct powder, but it's basically coming directly from the lab with their certificate of analysis, which I don't believe is what it comes down to. So the problem with methylene blue is that it's also notoriously hard to test for and to test accurately. So it's very difficult to know exactly what you're getting. So this is, again, we've had a lot of experience in the world over the last 5 years, plus now using methylene blue. So what I've seen countless times is somebody saying, I'm taking this amount of methylene blue in dropper form. If they know how much it is, they typically don't, but sometimes they can figure it out. And then they start taking the equivalent amount in our products. And it's like a night and day kind of thing. They feel so much better using our stuff at that same dosing because they're actually getting what they're supposed to be getting on that says on the label.
What about the USP? And that goes across not only methylene blue, but supplements that have the USP label. How reliable is that?
Unfortunately, it's not. The problem is that if it says USP on the label, it's supposed to be pharmaceutical grade. But even that means that they've got some sort of certification somewhere that said it was USP grade. Who got or gave them that certification? And we've tested USP, the methylene blue, for example, and it doesn't meet USP standards most of the time. And so USP standards are pretty strict because it's pharmaceutical grade. Ideally, you'd be selling that at a pharmacy. And we've actually even looked at some of the certificates of analysis from the pharmacies because you can get prescribed methylene blue as well. If you compare the pharmacy grade methylene blue with our grade, ours is typically better, typically from a heavy metal perspective, interestingly enough. Now, there's a certain amount of heavy metals that are allowed in the pharmaceutical grade because it's very difficult to get zero across the board with all your heavy metals with methylene blue. It's just not. I mean, you have like parts per million and parts per billion that might be in there. It's super low, which is going to be okay for the most part. So even the pharmaceutical grade that you get from a pharmacy is still going to have some typically. And so this is really what's so interesting about it's like a higher, just a bigger issue, sort of meta issue with all of the supplement companies out there. And you see about these fantastical stories about lead in your protein powder and heavy metals in your chocolate and all this kind of thing. So some of this is going to happen. Like you're going to get some heavy metal because it's just naturally producing in some stuff. Okay. Even in natural things. Okay. Arsenic in your brown rice and your rice. So you have to be aware that you're going to be subject to this as much as possible, but knowing what you're getting is the most important as much as you can understand, right? And so the problem with the supplement world is that there's just such little regulation. So you really have to be careful and understand the products that you're buying and knowing that you're getting them from good companies, right? And having good track records. And again, avoiding things on Amazon like the plague and avoiding the plague too, just in general, just don't get that.
That would be a good thing. Avoid that. But it's, yeah, so that USP label means nothing. I'm so disappointed because I thought
Well, I mean, hypothetically, it should mean something, but it's a trust but verify kind of thing, Zora, for me. Yeah, okay. If they're USP and it's a company you trust, then it's likely okay. But it's USP from a company you've never heard of. They're trying to sell you something that sounds cool. Do not just trust without verification.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So on the Amazon front too, and it's so tempting because it's
It
so
is.
fast to get your delivery right
It is.
away. And I've heard the same story again. There's just too many counterfeit. Is there any other site that you would trust? I don't know,
Mhm.
Troscriptions, I would certainly just go straight to the website, but in general for other products or things, and is there not a website that's a bit more trustworthy than Amazon?
So the way I would say it is this, if you can go directly to your manufacturer, you're actually doing them a service in two ways. One is that they're making more money on your product, even though they're charging you the same on Amazon. Okay. Amazon takes about a 30-40% cut of everything that's sold on there. So if you like your manufacturer, if you like your supplement company, it's always nice to go directly. The other thing I would say here is that if you're going to purchase from Amazon, purchase it when it's coming from the manufacturer, not from one of their warehouses, because you don't know what's in their warehouses. And that's really been one of the major issues with Prime shipping is that Prime's mostly coming from their warehouses. And the warehouses themselves, that's where all the counterfeit stuff typically is. So if you're getting it delivered or shipped from the actual manufacturer, that's going to be better than being shipped from an Amazon warehouse. Now, Do you want to buy your other things from Amazon, your things you go to Office Depot for? Sure, that's fine. But if it's something that like you want to ingest in your body, the prime example of this is a company called Metagenics. Metagenics had millions of dollars of counterfeit stuff in Amazon warehouses that was being shipped to patients. That was Metagenics, but it smelled rancid. And we also know that supplements can be contaminated with other kinds of things. And so the way I would go around it is if you're looking to Amazon, then buy from a company that's fulfilling themselves as opposed to the company that's shipping from their Amazon warehouse. So that's another little trick. But my preference here is to go directly to the manufacturers themselves. I mean, the nice thing about storefronts now is a lot of them are on a Shopify platform, which makes it very similar kind of checkout where you can save all your information across companies and it becomes a little bit easier. So that's what I do. If I'm going to do it, I also use third-party aggregators that I know are usually better quality overall, like things like Fullscript and Emerson and things like that are typically better because they do more vetting on their side to get them on their platforms.
Yeah, that's the thing. And we want a website to vet for that, for vet for the product, but have not only have a good and high quality product as well as a real product. But I also
Right.
had a friend who said she used to work in an Amazon warehouse, and she says, "Don't ever buy on Amazon if stuff you're going to ingest because it's not air temperature controlled.
Some
It's
of them
like
aren't. Yeah.
really
Yeah.
hot in there, and you have things that can go bad in the heat."
Yeah, that's why we don't have troches in there because troches are dissolvable at body temperature. And so we didn't want them in hot warehouses anyway. And then again, this whole fulfillment thing in their warehouses and counterfeit. And although one thing we don't have to worry about too much, Zora, in our world is counterfeit troches because they're not easy to make. And so
Yeah.
nobody's going to be counterfeiting our stuff. It would be stupid for them. And I don't recommend it because we were the stupid ones that made troches in the first place. They're not easy to make. And they're not easy to, but once we've dialed it in over the last 5.5 years now, we make a lot of these all the time. But it's not easy to do. And troches are dissolvable at body temperature. And so during the summer, for example, we ship everything on ice. We give people ice packs in their shipments because they can melt in transit. But it's worth it because they're so easy to titrate, so easy to use. They're so travel ready. Like a lot of liquids, you can't do liquids very easily. They're messy, especially methylene blue liquids. Even troches could be dangerous on some level. You have to be careful how you're cutting them. So if you're cutting a troche, you want to cut it on a dark surface or on a paper towel, for example. Or if you're cool, you can use your fingers like I do. But I'm like the ninja with the troches at this point in my life because I'm doing it all the time. And I've saved my marriage at least 3 or 4 times by having buffered vitamin C in my house because if you get it on a countertop, you can just rub it out with some buffered vitamin C. Sinks, laundry. Yeah, I've gotten lucky a couple times having that around, that's for sure.
Yeah, because it can stain. It can stain. So I remember, yeah, being very careful when I was playing around with trying to make my own mix in the dropper, and oh my gosh, ruined so many things. And I remember the
Yes.
first time I tried it, is a friend of mine who told me about taking it, and so I said, okay, I tried it, and then I had a podcast interview and I noticed my whole mouth was blue and my tongue, like
Mhm.
today is appropriate. It's okay. But I didn't want to,
Yeah.
like, and I just called him. I'm like, oh my God, what do I do? I have a recording in an hour. And he said, get a vitamin C. I had one that wasn't in a gel capsule, just a normal, and just rolled it
Mhm.
around my mouth and then it just went away. So we
Nice.
have the, yeah, cleanup control here.
Oh, I
So,
should mention about vitamin C briefly because I get that question a lot. Is it,
yeah.
can you take vitamin C at the same time as your methylene blue to decrease the amount of blue in your mouth? And the answer is that if you do combine methylene blue with vitamin C, it will turn it from blue to colorless. And that's actually because methylene blue is in this redox state we talked about, right? Which is it's either going to be blue or it's going to be colorless, depending on whether it has more or less electrons. And vitamin C neutralizes some of the electrons on the methylene blue. And so it turns it colorless. Now, we don't know about the effectiveness of methylene blue, turning it from blue to colorless. My general sense is that the blue color is more effective for most people than the colorless overall. So I don't recommend taking them at the same time. If you wanted to take methylene blue and then let it dissolve, and after like maybe 30 minutes to an hour, taking your vitamin C after, that's probably fine. Just as a heads up over there. I get that question a lot. And I understand it. Not everybody wants a blue mouth. But the key, as we mentioned earlier, is that you don't have to have a blue mouth. You can just swallow it and then you're cool. The best is just to do that on an empty stomach. And what's really interesting here, and I wanted to mention this, and I mentioned slightly about mitochondrial dysfunction before, is that most people out there can likely benefit from some methylene blue some of the time. Doesn't mean it has to be all the time. It could be just some of the time, depending on the situation. But if you're coming from a place where you've been sick for a long time, you've had chronic complex medical illness, you've had autoimmune issues for a long time, you've had chronic infection for a long time, just having a really difficult time, very likely, you have significant mitochondrial dysfunction. And that's where methylene blue really does shine. In my clinical practice, I use it very early on in my clinical protocols because it supports mitochondrial function so well without causing stress on the system. So starting off at low doses at 4, 8, 16 milligrams, and just slowly increasing that dose over time, they get more energy, they get more detoxification power without feeling like it's overbearing on energy or detoxification. Because it's overbearing on one of the other side of that, it can be very significant and be very difficult to tolerate. And so slowly increasing the dose. And once they find the right dose, then they can stay on that dose for weeks to months or sometimes longer if needed while you're optimizing mitochondrial function in other ways. And then slowly over time, as you're optimizing in the other ways, you can start peeling it off and take it less often, use it more periodically when you're traveling and when you're having a long day of work and stress, or you're doing more endurance training, things like that. And so that's the kind of framework that I use. And I think it's kind of helpful for people to understand, I think, a little bit about that.
Yes. No, I want to talk a little bit more too about the maybe contraindications or things. But before I do, I remember when I first heard about methylene blue and I saw it was blue, I was like, oh, comes from Japan. Spirulina. Oh, it must be something natural. So I heard this whole synthetic thing. I'm like, okay. But it does sound like a miracle in many ways. And the way I understand the thing I've been learning about methylene blue over the years, in the beginning, it's like, oh, I'll take this. But in fact, I understand it's no, this is kind of for therapeutic uses too. Like we have to, it's not like something you take all the time. It's as needed. And at least when I was prescribed methylene blue for my surgeries, it was like, you take it for this period of time. I don't know if it was maybe 6 weeks or something every
Mhm.
day. And again, like you said, kind of titrating up. And then but it's not something I think you just take willy-nilly. Is that right?
Well, I think it depends on kind of where you are in your health journey, right? And I think it's important to never take anything willy-nilly, understanding like why you're taking it and for how long and for what reasons. And as I was just kind of painting the picture here, if you're coming in a place where you're pretty well optimized already and you're getting maybe an acute stress like you did from a surgery, then using methylene blue to support you through an acute stress, absolutely. And it can absolutely be game changing in very many ways in that capacity. But on the other side of things, if you're coming in from a place where you're pretty sick, a lot of brain fog, a lot of chronic fatigue, a lot of challenges with attention or pain, or you've been having a challenge for a long period of time, methylene blue can be taken regularly for significant mitochondrial support, while hopefully you can do some of the other things that might help mitochondria over the long term. So changing your diet, your lifestyle, getting on vitamins, minerals, and supplementation, getting out of a bad relationship, toxic people, that's going to cause a lot of stress on your mitochondria. Getting out of fight or flight all the time, right? If you're always in fight or flight, always in that sympathetic dominant period, you can't heal, you can't detox, you can't build muscle. And so these are kinds of things where methylene blue can really come in and support mitochondrial function while you're doing the harder work of trying to sort all that stuff out. Maybe by yourself, but hopefully with a practitioner that can help you along the way. And that's when I sometimes use methylene blue 7 days a week for periods of months until I can get somebody to a place where they're feeling better and more supported. And then we can start weaning it off. But typically it's lower doses when that's the case. Typically we're talking about 4, 8 milligrams to up to maybe 25 milligrams a day for up to 7 days a week for a period of several months until I can really see them shift. And then we can start weaning them down. But the higher doses of methylene blue is a little bit different. Okay. If you're taking higher doses of methylene blue, it's often because you have significant more needs of mitochondrial support, or you have an infection that we're trying to address, or there's significant amounts of like acute inflammation. So the way that I think about more higher doses of methylene blue is that if you have a chronic infection, a chronic ongoing issue like that, like an infection specifically, typically a milligram per kilogram in a divided dose, maybe twice daily, is going to be very helpful for you for a period of time. It might be 5 to 7 days. It might be 2 to 4 weeks, but it's pretty finite in that capacity. And then if you have an acute issue, like for example, you had an acute surgery, Zora, where you had acute stress in the body, then using anywhere between a milligram to 2 milligrams per kilogram of methylene blue for a period of 5 to 7 days, maybe up to a couple of weeks, can be very helpful there because you're supporting the system as it's significantly inflamed or there's a higher risk of infection. So a good example, if My father, a couple weeks ago, had a dental surgery. And I use this with biological dentists. We use around 50 to 75 milligrams of methylene blue for 3 to 5 days after a significant dental surgery to prevent a number of things: prevent infection, prevent the inflammation and cascades that happen after a big surgery like that, to decrease risk of gut inflammation and brain fog and leaky gut and leaky brain that can happen because of that. And then another example is somebody has an acute infection, like acute viral illness. And I've used up to 2 milligrams per kilogram, so around 150 milligrams of methylene blue for 5 or so days with significant benefit. And this actually happened in my mom, using my parents today as examples. My mom had a tick bite in New York, and she lives in an area that's endemic with Lyme. So she used Doxy, which was fine. I mean, I think it's reasonable in her case, but she also used 150 milligrams of methylene blue for 5 days. Number one, she felt fantastic. And number two, no issues after the 5 days. And then we weaned her down over multiple days after that. And so I use these higher doses of methylene blue as an anti-infective acutely, and then for more chronic infections as well. But the majority of people that are on these higher doses are not going to be on for long periods of time. It's going to be the lower doses that can be maintained for long periods of time in people that really need it. And so, like some of my patients with autoimmune disorders, I've had them on 4 to 16 milligrams of methylene blue for years at this point, and they do very well with it because the autoimmune issue is not completely going away, and they continue to need that mitochondrial support.
So in the Troscriptions, you have a square that's cut in 4 mini squares. So how much is one full square?
So we have two different varieties. We have the methylene blue, the just blue, which is 16 milligrams of methylene blue. And we have our practitioner only strength, which is called Tro Plus blue, and that's 50. So for most people, the 16 milligrams is what you're going to be able to purchase directly. And that a quarter of that is going to be 4 milligrams. So a relatively easy and very well tolerated protocol would be start off with a quarter of the just blue for 3 days or so, no effect, increase it to a half. After 3 days, increase it to 3/4. After 3 days, increase it to a full. Most people will start feeling an effect somewhere between a half and a full, 8 to 16 milligrams. Some people do need to go up further. Some people do need to go up higher on their dosing and to see a significant benefit. But oftentimes, what I found over the years, Zora, is that where the research has mostly been done before 2020 really was in higher doses, about 1 milligram per kilogram or so. But what we found is with some of the newer literature at the time when we were first coming out with the products is that this 8 to 16 milligrams, especially for brain health and neurocognitive support and decreasing brain inflammation, is very compelling. And so using these doses, significant improvements. And I remember when we first started the company, maybe like a year into it, we had this lady that reached out. She had purchased it for her grandmother, the Just Blue, and her grandmother had mild cognitive impairment. And they gave her the methylene blue, and she started telling stories about her childhood in Mexico that nobody in the family had ever heard before. And this is maybe 6 months into releasing the products. And I was a little skeptical about methylene blue. I mean, in the beginning, because again, this is new. Nobody had done this before. Dr. Ted, who I work with, is like this. He has this fantastic way of feeling out what's going to be working before anybody else does. And I was skeptical. And then this first story, I was like, holy crap, what do we have here? And then I got another story maybe the week later of this lady that had mold for 3 years. The mold in her body was gone. The mold in her house was gone. She still felt terrible. She's a physical therapist, out of work for 2 years, starting taking methylene blue. 2 weeks later, she's back to work. And then another person with this severe spinal autoimmune issue that had been out of work again for years. And then 3 weeks later, after starting methylene blue, her pain was gone. I was like, what is up here? And then we've had thousands of stories like that over the years. And so I'm very much a proponent of it, obviously. I'm obviously biased here, but I don't think it's the only thing. Let me be clear here. And I also think that there's a range of dosing that's important. And there's also certain people, which I know you want to talk about, that maybe should not take methylene blue as well. And we can dive into that when you're ready as well.
Yes, yeah, because it sounds like a miracle, and we we have so many things, and it's something we can obviously order online, and we can try it ourselves and play around with the different things. But obviously, if you have some maybe serious issue like mold or Lyme, like you get your practitioner to help you use the appropriate
For
dosage.
sure.
But there are people who shouldn't be taking this or who they have contraindications. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So if you're pregnant or breastfeeding, do not take methylene blue at this point. If you are thinking about getting pregnant This is an interesting story, though, because if you're thinking about getting pregnant, where do we actually have the most mitochondria per cell if you're female? In ovaries and eggs. And then sperm is not too far behind. And so I've had interest in this. I have heard stories about improving fertility related to taking methylene blue, but just being mindful that if you're trying to conceive, maybe stopping it for 24 to 48 hours, it comes out of the body very quickly, just in case. Okay. So just be aware of that.
We don't
When
want
it
any blue
comes,
babies.
Yes, I don't think that's going to happen. Okay. In fact, the only studies that show any detrimental effect using methylene blue in pregnancy are only in third trimesters when they were doing amniocenteses and then using methylene blue as a tracer. So again, the likelihood is low, but just to say that. Okay. The other big category, methylene blue does increase serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine. Okay. So if you are on an SSRI or an SNRI, which is like the newer classification, your Effexors of the world and Pristiques and many other drugs like that.
These are
There,
antidepressants for those who maybe don't know.
good point. Yeah. Antidepressants. So most antidepressants are working on serotonin. Fun fact, we know that depression is not a serotonin deficiency anymore. We used to think this, but we know that people with depression and then people that don't have depression have the same amounts of serotonin. Now, artificially increasing it with an antidepressant can be helpful in some people. I'm not going to deny that, but they also come with black box warnings that say that they increase suicidality. So be aware of that, especially if you're younger. In fact, I know the person that got that black box warning on the box because her sister killed herself starting an SSRI. So these are not benign drugs, but sorry, that's an aside. But what it comes down to is that the theoretical risk here is something called serotonin syndrome, where if you're taking methylene blue that increases serotonin, and you're taking an antidepressant that increases serotonin, you're going to get this unsafe elevation of serotonin levels. Now, in clinical practice, this doesn't happen because we're using low doses of methylene blue and we're not using IV methylene blue. If you're using IV, definitely don't want to be on an SSRI or an antidepressant. But if you're on an antidepressant, there is a potential that you could use methylene blue if you're being under the supervision of a clinical healthcare provider. If you go slowly with the dosing, you likely will be tolerating it just fine, but do not do it unless you're under the supervision of a healthcare provider. Okay. The risk of serotonin syndrome is low. What I've seen mostly is GI distress because most of our serotonin is actually made in our gut. Now, we also excrete or the way that methylene blue comes out of the body is in the kidneys. So if you have kidney dysfunction, you have to be mindful that methylene blue is going to stay around for longer. So you'd want to work with a clinical provider just to make sure you get the right dosing. If you're on dialysis, do not take methylene blue because it's not going to come out of the body. If you have high blood pressure, methylene blue increases that norepinephrine and dopamine and serotonin, so that can sometimes increase blood pressure as well if you're already hypertensive. So if you're on antihypertensive drugs, please work with a clinical provider to make sure it's safe to take methylene blue. I mean, if you're taking any pharmaceuticals at all, you always want to go and talk to your doctor about taking any supplement, anything else to make sure it's not interacting with any of your medications. That's my umbrella statement for everybody here, okay? So be aware of that. Also, methylene blue is going to turn your urine blue, so be aware of that. It's not going to be a surprise. And just be mindful of that. Now, methylene blue is not going to turn your brain blue, I promise. Okay. This is something that came out earlier in 2025 that if you take methylene blue, your brain's going to turn blue. It doesn't do that at therapeutic doses that you'd find outside of an emergency situation. We mentioned earlier in the podcast that methylene blue can be used in emergency situations. Higher doses of it, like up to like 3 milligrams per kilogram IV, can be used in acute situations like shock, whether from septic shock, cardiogenic shock, or for cardiopulmonary arrest. It can sometimes reverse the pathology, but sometimes it's not going to work. And then if those higher doses are given, it could potentially cause your brain to be blue. But that's 3 milligrams IV, for example, versus 20 milligrams orally, which is not even remotely the same. Okay. So be aware of that. What else? Other things. Oh, yeah. And so if you're taking higher doses of methylene blue for longer periods of time, they can also potentially cause the gut microbiota colonies to shrink because it's antimicrobial. So you have to be aware of that. And then also think about detox symptoms as well. If you get sort of herxing kinds of symptoms, detoxification kinds of symptoms, these can happen, especially if you start off at too high of a dose of methylene blue rather than starting off at a low dose and increasing your dose over time.
Okay. Now, with that out of the way, I want to give people a little visual what this looks like if you're on YouTube. So you can see this is what we talk about when we mean those little squares. You can see I've been cutting them all in different sizes, but you have them scored and you can see obviously my finger's now turning really blue. But you've got So I don't need more energy. Like I'm good. I've got plenty of it. So I'm
Lucky you.
actually a pretty bad person to test it for energy. But you've got other things going on. You've got the focus, which I tried as well, and the sleep one. And the calm one I haven't, although I probably do need it since I've got so much energy. I'm a non-responder to most things. I just don't feel stuff. And if I take things, usually just because I believe that it's good for me, or I
Mhm.
test and I can measure and I can see the difference somehow. But when it comes to sleep stuff, my sleep is pretty good. I can't complain. But when I took the Trozy, I took 1/4 and I'm like, I don't know, didn't feel anything. Then I took a half and I was like, okay, I am feeling this because it was kind of sleep I don't remember falling asleep. I usually have some kind of a micro awakening or something where I'm kind of conscious. I could wake up, be conscious, but still fall asleep again and
Mhm.
have completely great deep sleep scores. But this was like, I think I just fell asleep and I'm already awake again, that 25-year-old type sleep. And I was like, what in the world is in this? And of course, I did read all the ingredients because this one, the sleep one, does not have methylene blue.
You just don't.
And I'm wondering, and you've got melatonin in there, but I can take 100 milligrams of melatonin. I feel zero. And I've done that for radiation protocols and stuff like that. Not because I was kind of crazy, but I was like, I took
Sure.
it, didn't feel anything. And so I just metabolize it quickly. But you do have 5-HTP in there. And I respond to that. That's one of the very few supplements I respond to. And I
Mm.
don't
Sounds
know
like
if
it needs some
it's
more serotonin, Zora.
what?
Sounds like it needs some more serotonin.
Could be. It could be. Because I don't know if it's that, but what's really cool about these formulations is that you have different things in there. Like you're pulling different levers. If I'm not a non-responder to melatonin, fine, we still got the 5-HTP or we still have other things in there. Tell us a little bit more. What else is in this sleep formula that makes me crash so hard?
Yeah, the thing about most sleep formulas is that they're addressing just one neurotransmitter system. What we did at Troscriptions with Troz specifically is that we addressed four neurotransmitters in the same product. We addressed what's called the adenosine system, the serotonin system, melatonin system, and what's the fourth one I'm missing? The GABA system, of course, as well. And so no other products out there are as comprehensive. And we have 8 different ingredients in that formula. And the way we formulate in general, Zora, Dr. Ted really formulates everything, is that low doses of everything that synergize together. So, for example, the blue carnitine that you were mentioning earlier, low doses of nicotine, caffeine, CBD, and methylene blue together. If you took any of those by themselves in the ingredient amount, you wouldn't feel much. But combining them together, it's the sum is so much greater than the parts. And the same thing is the case for Troz. Troz works in the GABA system by using two compounds, one called agrin, another one called honokiol or honokiol. Agrin is from a psychedelic mushroom, the Amanita muscaria or fly agaric mushroom. It's not psychedelic, but at low doses, it increases GABA by binding to where GABA would bind on the receptor. Honokiol is also working on the GABA receptor at a separate location. And you have adenosine directly and something called cordycepin. Cordycepin's from another mushroom called this cordyceps mushroom, the most active component of the mushroom. It increases deep sleep. It's an immune system enhancer. We have another product actually called Tromune that is full and high potency cordycepin that's fantastic, that increases deep sleep on its own, but it's also an anti-infective, antiviral, improves immune system function, amazing for travel as well. So you have adenosine and cordycepin. We're working on the adenosine system. Adenosine is a neurotransmitter in the brain, has other functions, but in the brain, it increases sleep drive. So gives you sleep pressure. And you have melatonin in there. Melatonin itself is working on giving you some sleepiness and then maintenance of sleep. Then we have CBD and CBN, which are working on the endocannabinoid system. I'm sorry, 5 neurotransmitter systems, not 4, because the endocannabinoid system is also a neurotransmitter system as well. So CBDN and CBD are working in the endocannabinoid system, which help relax the brain, calm down the brain, give the brain protection. And we have 5-HTP as well in there that's working on the serotonin system. So it's a comprehensive 5 neurotransmitter system sleep aid that's protecting you and helping you with your sleep architecture. So giving you more deep sleep, giving you more REM sleep. So it's not like you're paying some sort of debt that you're going to have to pay back later. Because even with just melatonin, you're not going to see good sleep architecture in a lot of people over time. even with just 5-HTP, even with just GABA. Like we've done it all here at very low doses to comprehensively support all those neurotransmitter systems together.
Oh, wow. Okay. It's really packs a punch. A question about the 5-HTP, and then I'm gonna let you go because I know you have to leave.
No, we're all good. Yeah. Yeah.
Have
We have
you on
time.
forever. And this is so interesting. So when I was learning more about 5-HTP, because again, I was thinking, what is this molecule? Why do I react so much to it? It said that it also sort of plays around with the serotonin level. Like you don't want to be reliant on this every single night. Cause I was like, this could be dangerous stuff because you could see wanting to have this kind of sleep every night. I don't know if it would do that, but is so let's talk about just the Z formula anyways, because it
Mhm.
has the 5-HTP. Is this something that people can use every single night, or is this going to be like, okay, let's just use this temporarily?
What I always say to my patients that ask me this question is that my goal for you is that you don't need this every night, that you have an optimized sleep routine, that you have optimized sleep schedule, like all the things related to sleep that you've got dialed in. And then you only need this when you have a more challenging time. However, the way we've designed it is that because it's so low dose with everything and synergistic, you can take it regularly without any issues. Now, if you take it for a couple weeks every day and you stop it immediately, you might have some rebound issues a little bit because again, you just came off a sleep aid you've been taking for 2 weeks straight. So you'd want to wean it down over a couple days. But there really is there's no withdrawal or tolerance or dependence. We see people taking the same dose all the time because it's again, low doses of everything. If you take melatonin over time, you're gonna have to increase your dose over time to get the same effect. If you just take melatonin, or if you just take GABA, or if you just take 5-HTP, because your body is going to get sort of used to that, create some sort of compensation for it, then you need more of it over time. But the way we've developed it at Troscriptions, this is for all of our products, by the way, especially our GABA ones, our ones that are focused on calming down the nervous system. So our TroCalm is the same way. And what's cool about that, Zora, for you is that TroCalm is going to help calm down your nervous system without making you feel tired because it's got this cool ingredient called B3 GABA in there that enhances B3 levels in the brain, which are mildly activating along with enhancing GABA itself. And GABA supplements, just by the way, GABA itself is too big of a compound to get across the brain. So if you're taking GABA supplements and they work for you, it's likely because you have a leaky brain and a leaky gut that's corresponding to that. So it's something you need to get checked out by your practitioner. So the way we formulate always is comprehensive, low dose, and synergy. And that's what we did for Troz. That's what we did for TroCalm. That's what we did for Bluecanatine. And then Just Blue is pure methylene blue, which you can titrate and find the dose that's right for you. But the nice thing about methylene blue on its own, it's like it's its own synergistic thing here because it's compensating for that both ends, both the energy and detoxification, that clean burning energy, like an electric car versus a gasoline powered car kind of thing.
I'm totally converted to the troches because when I was taking the drops, when I didn't know about, well, I actually did know about prescriptions, but I had gotten this thing. I don't know why, but I didn't because you're in the US. Actually, I always think it was always a little difficult for me, but I eventually got
Sure.
it. But when I was taking those drops, I was like, couldn't wait for that protocol to end because it tasted bad and I would
Uh-huh.
try to put it in the back of my tongue and everything. But you formulated these troches and they actually taste good. So I have to say, well done. I don't know how you
Thank
master
you.
that, but it's almost like a minty fresh feeling if you are leaving it to dissolve in the gum. So I guess if you swallow it, it's not a big deal, right?
No, not a big deal. You're not going to taste it either way. So
Awesome.
if you swallow it, yeah.
Okay, so I have a million more questions actually. I wanted to talk to you even about HBOT and BPC 157, like all these other cool questions because I know you are into the hyperbaric oxygen therapy as well. But we ran out of time, and my last question to you though is so we'll have to
Sure.
talk on another time for that because
Absolutely.
I
Happy to come
want to
back,
pick
Zora.
your brain, but you're pretty much one of the leading voices actually in the health optimization and longevity space. And I know you're walking the talk. So what does your own morning protocol look like? And how does methylene blue fit into your personal health protocol?
So I use a methylene blue probably about 3 days per week. And sometimes it's 4 milligrams once a day. Sometimes it's 4 milligrams twice a day. On big days, I'll use it in combination with Bluecanatine as well, which is the combination with nicotine, caffeine, and CBD. That'll give me 3 to 5 hours of focus. I've also been playing around with Just Blue in the afternoons with a nicotine patch, interestingly enough, and just kind of playing around with that because I'm a little bit more sensitive to caffeine. So having caffeine in the afternoon is not always awesome for me, but nicotine is very short acting. So you can use it for a couple hours as a patch and then just take it off and it's gone in a couple hours, which also works. So I've been playing around with that. What's funny, Zora, I have 4 kids and I'm not an early morning person. And so up until very recently, I had very little of a morning routine. If I got 5 to 30 seconds in bed after my alarm went off to just try to center myself and just sort of give myself a moment for the day, it was a good day. Now that my kids are a little bit older and they're in school, I like to take a little bit of time to meditate when they leave, and not right immediately when I wake up. They like go to school, cook them breakfast, get them over there, and then meditate, exercise, take my shake in the morning, and then have my methylene blue is a pretty common. My evening routine is a little bit longer. I have a infrared sauna, so that's typically my wind down in the evenings. And I try to really do some stretching and some meditation and some other things to really kind of finish off and wind down at the end of my day. But I'm not averse to taking Trocom at the end of my day if it's been a long one, because that really does help me wind down at the end of mine. That's a big one for me. I don't typically need sleep aids, but I'll take Tro Plus Immune, which is our higher strength methylene, higher strength immune product at night as a nice immune system support, especially when I travel.
Oh, love that. Okay, I'm going to try the calm before I go to bed tonight because I think I just powered myself with the Just Blue
Yeah.
and see how that works out for me because I appreciate your time. I appreciate there's so much I do want to ask you. You're such a wealth of knowledge here, and I could talk to you forever, but I know you have another meeting to go to. But I'm going to have links to where to get Troscriptions in the show notes, so you can just go to troscriptions.com /Zora. Just use the code Zora and you're going to get 10% off. And if you have questions for Dr. Scott Sherr, you can find him on Instagram at Dr. Scott Sherr. Or you've got some YouTube as well. You've got your own podcast. And guys, just go and follow him because you've got some great guests. I was looking through the guests that you've had. I'm like, oh, it's amazing guests. So well done to you. Are there any last words or things that you'd like to share before I let you go?
Well, thank you for having me, Zora. This has been a pleasure. I hope it's been helpful. Just remember, you go out there, try to go with companies that you trust. Try to find people that you really do feel aligned with, and always think about what your foundational health looks like along the way. So just be careful chasing anything, chasing another methylene blue, chasing another supplement without looking at foundational health biomarkers and understanding what is happening on the ground level. This is what our nonprofit's all about, health optimization, medicine, and practice. This is my clinical practice. I'm not here to sell you products directly. I'm hoping to help you educate on how to think about using methylene blue in clinical practice. In my clinical practice, that's how or in your own personal life, but using it in that context is always going to be best.
Awesome. Hold on, my battery, just not my battery dying. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Scott. And I can't wait to talk to you again. And thank you, everyone who's reached the end of the episode and excited to try methylene blue or know a lot about methylene blue. Hopefully, you learned something new. We appreciate you spending your time with us and have a good day, good night, good morning, wherever you're at. And we'll see you next time. Take care.